Hey guys, ramble time, been a while. First I had to dump this camera onto one of my drives and that one's full, so I gotta switch to a brand new drive for saving all my videos. You know, I've lost this channel twice already, and so I do not trust that my videos will be available forever if I don't back them up myself. So I also don't trust many of the cloud services out there, and plus I have so much video footage from like 3,000 freaking videos on this channel, literally, that I just keep going through external terabyte hard drives, and this camera dumps at like 16 gig at a time when it's full. And so because I've got my new camera over Christmas, I'm going to take this Vlogity camera and set it to the lowest setting possible. That way I just have you know, the smallest files. And really, do you guys mind? I mean, it's still probably HD compared to what we were uploading 10 years ago. That's for damn sure. Anyways, check it out. Misty got me a poop Pez dispenser with real Pez candy in it. Matches my little poop pillow behind me. See that? Misty doesn't know that I associate this with shitlords, and that the pillow behind me is actually an ironic statement, kind of like all of the YouTube subscribe, rate, you know, play button crap all over. I really don't mean it. I'm not that big of a shitlord. But maybe I should not eat candy while I'm talking. Anyways, it's been a while. I know I've been ripping you guys off by not putting in regular videos like I used to, but my brain has been full. And I saw that everybody else today has been talking about a shooting in Christchurch, and I was like, who the fuck needs to hear about everybody's opinion on that shooting? You know, there are a lot of YouTubers that they just think that, you know, whatever is on and popping in the news, that people want to know their opinion on it, even though they've stated it multiple times in the past, especially with subjects such as gun violence, where we know where certain people stand on this because they have to keep on getting on the same dead horse and beating it every freaking time something happens, you know. And they even point out that, like, there's a pattern to the way that the news covers things and the arguments that people make with these things. So this is not going to be one of those videos. This is going to be a requested video from somebody. I get a lot of requests when I don't make videos from people who just want to, I guess, prime me with a subject, and sometimes it falls under the category of, just like I said, I don't think that every newsworthy thing that happens in the world needs to have my opinion applied to it, right? I don't think that people want to listen to my opinion about every newsworthy thing. I am not that sort of clickbaity, hungry for views person. 3,000 videos on YouTube aside here, I'm just saying, I don't have to live and die by the view count so much that you guys need content from me every fucking day, and I'm not that desperate that I will check Reddit's homepage for something to talk about, or the Google trending, or whatever it is that leads people to think that they need to make a video about this subject and that subject. Ugh. Anyways, today's video was requested a long time ago by Poseidon Kicklodon, and he wanted to know my thoughts on the legalization of cannabis here in Colorado, and probably more generally than that. Context, as most of you who are regular watchers of my channel know, I am an addiction counselor, and there are many different facets to the arguments for and against legalization of marijuana, but I will try to cover the ones that I think are unique to my perspective. Right? So, what are the benefits of legalizing cannabis? Well, for one, legalization and decriminalization, two different things, right? I am all for the decriminalization of drugs, right? The model that a lot of countries that have had a lot of better outcomes in their studies have taken, the model of let's not burden them, saddle people with a criminal record that will follow them for the rest of their lives. I am very happy that there are even states that are retroactively purging their criminal records of all the people that were convicted of just pot-related crimes. You can even have that done here in Denver. It's a little bit harder because they're not being proactive about it, and you have to go to a website that hasn't been working. It's been kind of wonky when I've checked on it, trying to lead clients to that. But basically, you can apply to have your only cannabis criminal record expunged if that's the only thing that's in your way between you and living the best life that you can and you getting a job and all that stuff. Because joblessness, that just feeds right into drug use. Seriously, like hopelessness at all feeds drug use, right? People who cannot have goals because they are legally barred from having regular goals, they are going to seek other ways to get out of the reality that they find themselves in. And it's not that hard to understand that. So, decriminalization, I am all for. And I think that with that, intrinsically, there comes a bit of legalization, like allowing the sale of drugs in a way where they are regulated. That could be like some countries where they have clinics where they will give you a fix of opiates, pretty much whatever you want, short of killing you. And maybe let you even come in twice a day. And it can be down to how they're trying to regulate the cannabis industry here in Colorado, where you have to have a license to have a recreational or a medical model for your shop, and some places have both, and what all that entails, and taxes, whatnot. What I found here in Colorado is that even though there has been legalization of cannabis, there is still a black market. Crazy that. And I think it comes down to the prices. I mean, any time where something sells legally for people's habits of $20 to $40 a day, some people are blowing on this stuff. Anytime there's that much money to be had, people will try to undercut it and get around the law and sell their stuff for cheaper. And people are still, growing illegally and selling illegally, and just, the legal market gives people a better idea of what price point they should be paying, because, if somebody's trying to charge more than what they can get for legal here, they're probably going to know that they're being ripped off, or extorted, as it were. But yeah, for $20, people can get something for recreational use that could also be used in the medical industry. Like the strength of what is in the shops, it is like 100 times more powerful than the shit that was on the streets in the 70s. I really don't see that it has dismantled the black market, but it does seem to have destabilized the organized crime around the drugs that we've decriminalized and legalized. It doesn't seem like gangs are interested in peddling things that you can get legally anyway. And that's true for alcohol, that's true for cannabis, that's true for tobacco. You don't go find a drug dealer to find a pack of cigarettes. I don't see that there's been that much improved safety or quality when we're talking about cannabis. I mean, there are some shops that will test the THC levels of their cannabis and then boast about how high they are and whatnot. But really, it's a largely unregulatable thing. I mean, plant to plant, it's going to differ. So maybe in edibles and tinctures and whatnot, you can have more standardized dosing. But when we're talking about vegetable matter, there's intrinsically going to be differences. Just like there's a difference in how many seeds are in each watermelon. Even though the watermelons were sold right next to each other in the supermarket and probably came from the same farm. I don't see as much of a problem with the purity of cannabis as it is with heroin, where people are getting fentanyl-laced heroin and not knowing it. Yeah, people might have laced cannabis, but there's enough there's enough demand for just cannabis alone that people don't really, even before legalization, they weren't really lacing cannabis that they were selling unless that was a positive selling note for it. Like, hey, I dipped this in formaldehyde, and they would sell that as the product, not hiding it. It does tend to make it more available for people who need it for medical problems. People who might have otherwise had to rely on the black market in order to serve them can now go to any number of shops. In fact, in Denver, I think we have more pot shops than bars and lawyers combined. That's how crazy that market just exploded. And I think, maybe in 10 years there'll be a lot of consolidation on that. But for now, people are trying to grab their foothold in that growing market. But I will agree that there are medical reasons why people might want to use cannabis. And there are also medical and psychological things that people might treat with cannabis, which actually makes the problem worse. And I'll get to that in a second. I think that cannabis legalization, not only does it allow for police to focus on different drugs that are worse for the community, it also allows them to focus their resources on more violent style crimes. And I've really not run into anyone who has had a charge based on just cannabis, even if they were growing illegally. I mean, it seems to be like it's getting more and more destigmatized to the point where the community and the police just don't feel like it's that big of a deal. You know, you wouldn't bust somebody for having a distillery in their garage either if they were, making, some sort of whiskey they were trying with a science experiment contraption in their garage. They might suspect that it's a meth lab, but as soon as they find out, oh, it's just alcohol, we got better things to do. Who has time to look up the legalities of what licensing you need for having your own little microbrew in your garage? Nobody. I don't hear anything about that anymore. But there are a lot of cons to cannabis being legalized. That just making a video like this, I know that I'll get a comment that's like novel length that wants to refute some of the things that I'm saying, even though it's not just like my opinion as an addiction counselor or the science that comes from just this country, but we can look at science from all over the world that has chimed in on this, and marijuana is addictive. Just saying those three words together, marijuana is addictive, I know somebody will leave a comment saying, no, it fucking isn't. It is. There is a listing in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual from the APA for it. I've seen the withdrawal symptoms from it. I've seen people psychologically addicted as well as physically addicted. And one of the problems in measuring this addiction is that for people who are heavy smokers of cannabis, it can actually persist in their body for up to 3 or 4 weeks. To the point where, like, you think, hey, we're going to put this to the test. Let's quit smoking pot for a week, and we'll see if we have any withdrawal symptoms. Well, a lot of these things that I'm talking about for very heavy smokers of cannabis, they would present themselves weeks later, and just doing like a 1 day or 1 week off test isn't really going to get down to the brass tacks of how you feel when you're actually free of THC. Do a urinalysis and a blood test at the same time, and watch your blood levels go all the way down to 0 after a couple weeks, and then test yourself and see how you feel. Because there are some things that are definitely exacerbated by cannabis when people are taken off of it. For example, anxiety. If you have somebody who's treated their anxiety with cannabis, taking them off of the cannabis, you'll see that for at least a while, with no other treatment for their anxiety will be worse than when they first started treating with cannabis, because of the rebound effect of what happens when you are, taking a drug and then you come off of it. It's kind of like withdrawal. The opposite will happen, but cannabis does seem to exacerbate a lot of psychological problems. There is a decrease in mental health that you will see with people who use cannabis, and that's both when they stop and when they continue. You know, it's just if you already have the proclivities in your family for bad mental health, I wouldn't recommend adding drugs to the mix. I'm not one of those people who actually worries about secondhand smoke. As far as even with tobacco, I haven't worried about it that much, but I do know people personally that are like allergic to cigarette smoke, and even cannabis smoke can set off some people, but it hasn't been that big of an issue since the legalization of cannabis, that people are complaining about, oh, people smell like pot smoke all the time. And it's they blew their pot smoke from the other side of the park, and when we smelled it, we started coughing, and it's gotten into my lungs, it's going to cause me cancer. None of that has happened. I mean, places where you couldn't smoke cigarettes, you can't smoke anything. And so it really hasn't been that big of a deal, especially with laws protecting a lot of workplaces from smoking at all. So lastly, I'll say that cannabis does alter your perception of things, and I've actually had people, when I say that I've never used cannabis, they're like, no, bullshit. Just look at you. And they ascribe something of a reservedness and a calmness about me to, oh, that guy's probably a regular weed user. He doesn't like freak out when we're using weed, and he's kind of chill, so maybe it's a safe bet that he's on it. And when people are saying that it when people take that argument that might pop up in the comment section, that it's not altering your state of mind in any negative way, those are probably the same people that might think, you're fucking bullshitting. You so smoke weed, and I don't, and I never have, but I think it just points to like the universality of people being aware that it is affecting people's personality and their perception of things. And some people are willing to really try to go into semantics to say, well, that's not a negative thing. Pot only does positive things to your personality. And I just don't think that that's the case. And it really does have to be taken on a case-by-case basis, but given how much it can exacerbate people who already have psychological problems into having serious breakdowns, I'd say it's just not a safe thing for a lot of people to try. My anecdotal best argument for how addictive cannabis is using one of the criteria that all drugs have in the DSM, in that it affects people's lives in a way where they cannot control it. They cannot stop even if they want to, and even in the face of having severe ramifications if they don't. And marijuana being one of the lighter drugs in the world, it's far less dangerous than heroin or meth or even alcohol. Far less dangerous than cocaine. But when people are tasked to not use it after using it for a very long time, many of them find it very difficult to not do it. even when I have been in rehab programs and had to be in charge of the urinalysis of everyone in the program, and people are there by court order, mandated by their probation or parole officer, and they are not allowed to use this substance, or they will face remand to prison for the rest of their time on paper. Even with that hanging over their heads, they cannot stop themselves from using for a period of probation or parole, which could be just a couple months more. All they need is a few more clean UAs, and as soon as they get off paper, they can go right back to it. A lot of people find it very hard to stop for even that length of time because it's addictive. Right? And, yeah. I wish that there was more of a streamlining of laws between federal and state, and even the laws that pertain to people when they are on probation and parole versus when they are not on probation and parole and they're just regular civilian people. I wish there was more of a streamlining of that, because a lot of those people who are on probation or parole, they would be arguing, well, you know, this is a right. It's legal now. You know, why can they sanction me for using it when it's legal? You know, same reason why they can sanction someone for drinking while they're on probation or parole. You know, that's legal too. You know, but cannabis seems to be in this strange twilight zone of arguments where there's all sorts of mental gymnastics that will happen around it, that, you know, if you try to draw an analog to very simple other situations to make your point, people will be just getting their panties in an uproar, like, it's not the same. You know, cannabis cures my cancer, and it makes me a sane person, and it makes me chill, it makes me not do crimes. You know, it's like, sometimes I just can't really argue with people that that are very firmly in the camp of cannabis being a superfood. You know, like avocados. So, yeah, those are my feelings on it. And from previous videos on this subject, I think it's also probably very pertinent that I do state very clearly that 95% of the clients that I see as an addiction counselor are because of alcohol. And of the other 5%, maybe, you know, outside of correctional programs, maybe one or two might present to me with a problem with cannabis, but even those are coming to me pretty much because they have to quit because of a legal mandate, because they are being monitored in some way. And yeah, the scale of how many people I'm going to see in my career for every other drug, mostly alcohol, but for every other drug, versus cannabis, I mean, I don't even really feel like it's worth the time that I put into this video to talk about it anymore, because it clearly is not that big of a problem that we need to be having these discussions around cannabis so much as we need to have them around what obviously is causing the problems en masse. People don't want to rehash our history with alcohol in our country, but the more I look at the real problems from a clinical perspective in our country, the more I get closer to wanting more authoritative controls on our alcohol consumption. And if I'm not willing to go all the way into prohibition completely of alcohol, that I'd at least want people to maybe have a limit on how much they can buy in a month. You know, I've experienced this while in the military overseas, where we were only allowed to buy up to 2 bottles of hard liquor per month and 2 cases of beer. And that is more than I would ever drink in a month at any point in my entire life. But for some people, that seems to be way too little of an amount of alcohol to be restricted to. And for those people, I think, well, maybe they need to really examine their lives a little bit. Even when you try to set a threshold that seems ridiculous, like, say, 10 bottles of hard liquor and 3 cases per week. You know, there are people that you're going to catch with that sort of a threshold that are way out there. You know, that's like an argument I've had about involuntary commitment. I believe we should have a law that states that if in 6 months' time you show up in an emergency room 10 times for being drunk, you should be committed. I've never shown up 1 time in an emergency room, and most people who do, it doesn't happen more than twice in their life for that, because it's a wake-up call. But for those people who it isn't, just think about how much money we're going to save on healthcare and our taxes if we mandate that those people who show up that often in emergency rooms and detoxes and whatnot, if we just mandate them legally to go to a treatment program. You know? Are we going to get there? Not without a fight, because there's so many people who will argue that we need more liberty in our lives. And to that I'll say, slavery to a substance does not equate to liberty in my eyes. Check you later. I'll send another ramble probably tomorrow. The move from a structuralist account in which capital is understood to structure social relations in relatively homologous ways to a view of hegemony in which power relations are subject to repetition, convergence, and rearticulation brought the question of temporality into the thinking of structure and marked a shift from a form of Althusserian theory that takes structural totalities as theoretical objects to one in which the insights into the contingent possibilities of structure inaugurate a renewed conception of hegemony as bound up with the contingent sites and strategies of rearticulation of power. What the fuck did I just read?